Hi, and welcome to In Our Own Voice. In Our Own Voice is a presentation on your community radio, KSUN Community Radio, and we're proud to be here to provide some insight into what it's like to live with mental illness. Mental illness affects 1 in 5 people every year, not only in Kansas but around the world. And we believe that the voice of people with mental illness and their family members is something that needs to be talked about more. So, my name's Andy Martin. I'm the Director of Communications and Development for NAMI, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, for the state of Kansas. And I'm here from Topeka, and I am working with two of the best Davids I've ever met. I've got two other guys here. David Peterson, could you tell us who you are and why you're here today?
Certainly, Andy. I'm, as you said, David Peterson. I'm a vice president of NAMI Wichita.
And NAMI stands for what?
National Alliance of Mental Illness. And Wichita has a chapter that we feel is very prominent in the state of Kansas. We have several programs that help bring awareness. We advocate for the mentally ill. We have programs of support and awareness that gives us all an opportunity to destigmatize mental illness.
How about you, the other David? Yeah, David
Yes,
Larson.
I'm David Larson. I am a member of NAMI Wichita, which stands for National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I am a peer, also known as a consumer, meaning I deal with mental illness in my life. I have major clinical depression.
Well, I'm really grateful for you being here today to talk with us and help NAMI talk in our community. The purpose of this program is we're trying to provide more information about what it means to live with mental illness in our community and provide different perspectives on that. One of the things I love about community access radio and what this radio station is all about is that we each have our own voice, we each have our own perspective, and mental illness is kind of a hidden voice.
It is.
Sometimes you can hear the voice of a man or hear the voice of a woman. You can hear the voice of a person that's black or the voice of a person that's from Latin America. But mental illness, it's kind of hard to know if a person has mental illness or not. And you'll notice I'm using that person first language. I'm a person with mental illness. And it's so when we're in our own voice or we're speaking in our own voice as people with mental illness, we start with the idea that we're all people and we all have struggles and challenges with our emotional health and our mental health. I'm just kind of curious, how did you guys get involved with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, as we're kind of starting here?
Well, as a family member, my son came down with mental illness when he was 18. He was in a parking lot at Walmart and wanted to run for president. And obviously we knew something was wrong. He was in and out of hospitals at that time. His mother, who is now passed, but got involved in NAMI and became the president of NAMI. And she introduced me to NAMI, National Alliance of Mentally Ill, and I've been a member for many years, and just recently in the last 2 years I've become a board member.
How about you, David? How did you find out about us?
Well, I was diagnosed with depression in 2001. My wife had systemic lupus erythematosus, and long big word, basically she had lupus. And the family was giving me problems trying to deal with all of life's situations. I was at my wit's end. I was close to break then, but I didn't break. What did happen, however, was in 2015, I had attempted suicide, and I was taken to the crisis unit, to the behavioral health service place for Via Christi, and then to Osawatomie Hospital. And when I was released from Osawatomie Hospital, I was homeless. A family took me in, and that family was actually involved with NAMI, and they are the ones who directed me towards NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness.
Yeah, it's our family members and people that we know that are connecting us to the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI is the largest grassroots advocacy network in the United States for people with mental illness and their families. We are a membership organization. Anyone can be a member. We have an open door kind of membership for like $5, or for an individual it's $40, and for a family it's $60. But as a community alliance, our primary mission is to provide awareness, support, education, and advocacy. So, well, that's a little bit of an introduction to what we're doing, and I think we're going to go on to our next segment a little bit. So thanks for listening to us talk in our own voice. This is Our Own Voice, and I'm Andy Martin, your guest host today. This program is intended to provide insight into what it's like to live with mental illness. All of us recognize that, we all have emotions and feelings and thoughts. Sometimes, though, our brains kind of get wacky, and we all struggle, being able to communicate our emotions like anger or fear or sadness or being hurt or joy. For those of us that have a mental illness, our brains just don't allow us to process information the same way. Sometimes we don't understand what reality is, or even if in reality we want to resist it. We want to make some part of it different. And so I think all of us can kind of relate to it, but it's still hard to talk about it. So David Larson, you are a gifted person at talking about your mental illness. Is it hard for you to do that still?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah.
I still do, yeah.
I know that for myself, this is one of the first times in my professional career that I can talk about my general anxiety, and I really don't think that much about it anymore. But I do have to recognize that it might be different if I had a severe mental illness like schizophrenia or a bipolar disorder, and how easy it is in our culture to start worrying about what other people think. But because of letting people know that I experienced a traumatic abusive situation that gave me post-traumatic stress disorder, what are people going to think of me? And how much of what we're talking about in this program in terms of we're using our voice to destigmatize mental illness.
Yes. And that's a big thing, because the stigma that's associated with mental illness oftentimes is so overwhelming, whether it is coming from the outside, from people, directing it towards those who are mentally ill, or coming from the person themselves who is struggling with mental illness. The stigma can be overwhelming at times.
Frankly, and what I'm learning in my work is that, I'm supposed to be talking about how to communicate and market the National Alliance on Mental Illness in the state of Kansas. And one of the best ways that we can do that is by having more people speaking out and saying, our own voice is a voice of mental illness.
That's
My
right.
own voice is and just by letting people know that I'm confident with that, and I realize that my mental illness isn't any different than my high blood pressure or my diabetes or a broken arm, that we can talk about medical problems and everything's okay, but it's just as okay and just as normal to have a mental disease too.
Within NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, we talk about how a mental illness is a physical illness that is caused by environmental triggers. And so your brain is an organ within your body, and it is affected by chemicals, by other things that happen to you, by stress. All those things piled up on top of each other can lead you down the pathway of mental illness.
So I learned this from Treva here in Wichita. Treva Lichty taught me, that it is a biological brain dysfunction.
Yes,
That's
correct.
one of the basic definitions of mental illness. I wanted to just kind of get a little bit of introduction. You've done a lot of training on how to talk about your mental illness in a program called In Our Own Voice.
That's correct.
And if I remember correctly, there's kind of 5 components to that presentation.
There are the dark days. There is acceptance of the illness. There is treatment, where we talk about the treatment. There is coping skills and strategies. And there are successes, hopes, and dreams, where we sort of tie up everything and say, this is where we are now.
So we're going to talk more in a lot more depth in our next segment about all of those things. But I guess for those of you that are listening, if you have a community organization, a church, a school, any setting where you would like to have somebody come and talk about mental illness and what it means to be a person living with mental illness, they can come and do a presentation called In Our Own Voice.
That's right.
And could you just give us a little summary of how that presentation works with the video?
Sure. We have a video that we present where the video is a 15-minute video divided into those 5 segments of dark days, acceptance, treatment, coping skills and strategies, and successes, hopes, and dreams. And in between each one of those segments, there are 2 presenters who will present their story, their life story, as to what they've experienced in dark days and so on.
So once again, we're kind of role modeling the different voices and the different perspectives, that mental illness doesn't have just one voice, that if anything, there is that reference but in the Judeo-Christian Bible about the man who is legion, and he has many voices. That's the way we talked about mental illness in the ancient world. But we're bringing our own voice to Wichita, Kansas. So, for those of you that are listening to this program, just remember that mental illness doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. I can have a mental illness and I can be okay, and you can be okay, and we're all okay.
And we'll be right back.
If you would like to learn more about the National Alliance on Mental Illness and how you can get involved in mental health advocacy, please visit our website at NAMI.org.
Our Own Voice is a program produced by the National Alliance on Mental Illness for Wichita. Our program is intended to provide insight on what it's like to live with a mental illness. If you're listening to this program and you've never thought that you had a mental illness, that's okay. If you do have a mental illness, I'd ask you, have you ever talked with anybody about it?
Good question.
And how hard is that to do? It's hard to talk about things that maybe we're ashamed of or that we feel guilty about, but that's what this program, Our Own Voice, is intended to do, is get people talking with other people about their mental illness. So
I would like to interject something here, and that is that mental illness is something that was not brought on by you. You did not cause it. You are not any less because it's happened to you. It's something that just happens to people, and we need to destigmatize, get rid of the stigma that's associated with it.
Great. I'm just going to recite some statistics here for us all again. 1 in 5 people every year experience a mental illness. Over a lifetime, the World Health Organization says that 50% of all people will experience some kind of mental health challenge. 1 in 10 children in our communities are struggling with a mental illness. The really tragic thing is that all across the country, but in Kansas, over 50% of the people that have a mental illness are not receiving treatment or not pursuing treatment. So in Kansas, we believe there's 169,000 people that have a mental illness that aren't talking about it. They're not talking to their healthcare provider. They're not talking to a family member. They're not getting treatment.
Yeah.
In Sedgwick County, you would argue that there are 50,000 people walking around this county maybe even listening to this radio program on KSUN Community Radio that are feeling something's wrong, but they can't put their finger on it. And so I want to give you a chance, David Larson, to talk about what it's like for you to have mental illness and what were your dark days like? What was...
My dark days were like a world that was filled with so much gray that no color could be seen. It wasn't just depression as people know it. It was also being angry and flying off the handle at the littlest of things. It was being confused a lot. It included basically not wanting to get out of bed in the morning, wanting to just hide myself away from the world. And it came with a lot of low self-esteem, which I still struggle with.
So I always have to be careful for my own self and with other people as we talk about our mental illness, how we can easily it is to become a victim to it, and that we dwell too much on the dark and that. But I think we have to start with that there have been really hard times, and the reality is, if we're going to be human, we're going to have hard times.
That's right. And those hard times, they may affect you in such a way that you experience the trauma of mental illness, or they may not, and you may be one of the lucky ones, I guess is the term. As is said in the In Our Own Voice presentation, one of the quotes from the video is, "Mental illness is not for sissies." It's not for someone who thinks that they can just lounge around all day.
David, do you want to talk about what the dark days were for you, or might have been for as a family member?
As a family member, they still go on and on until there are good days and there's bad days. If you can imagine a roller coaster that starts out in 1993 and to 2018, it's a long roller coaster, but there's a lot of ups. But there's a lot of deep downs, and it's just something that, as a family member, you have to love that person. That's the one ingredient I think David would agree on, is to give that family member love, and sometimes that's hard.
Yeah, especially when they're acting out in such a way that they're not taking care of themselves or you or other people. I'm real curious, when you use the word acceptance in your presentations, as you talk about your mental, what were you accepting? What does acceptance mean?
Accepting the mental illness. I have major clinical depression, and accepting that the fact that, number one, major clinical depression is not who I am as a person. It is part of me, but also accepting what it does to me and how I need to combat it and deal with it.
So in my own recovery, that's what we talk about from a 12-step perspective. Step one is always recognizing that I have a problem, and I'm not the problem, but there is this problem that I need help dealing with, and that is the first step in any type of recovery that we're going to experience with a mental illness, no matter how serious or debilitating it might be. For you personally, how did you get to that moment?
Well, I'm still getting to that moment, I would say. It's not something that's easily gotten to.
Yeah, we're always kind of struggling to get to accept, just like accepting the fact that we've got a time boundary. So we're going to call it quits and we'll be back.
Okay.
Our Own Voice is talking about what it's like to live with mental illness, and we've talked about what it means to have dark days and come to accept the fact that I have a mental illness. And then we start to get to the recovery plan. David, could you talk to us a little bit about your recovery plan and what that means?
Yes, my recovery plan includes my treatment, which includes medications. I have to take daily medications every day, and it's not something that I can simply forego. It's brain chemistry that I need help with. I also have to work with my own personal coping skills, knowing when I am encountering a difficult time or something. I need to be able to focus my mind and try to lift myself up. I also have to use a lot of positive self-talk because self-talk works for me. I also have to work with, went out of my head. It helps me understand the way I do the things I do.
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness, thank you. You were reading my mind. I have to practice mindfulness, which is just taking a minute to absorb something, to ignore the rest of the world and absorb something. My favorite mindfulness, of course, is eating a piece of chocolate. I've shared that, as well as my mindfulness that I experience when I am drinking coffee. Yes.
Just so that you're not smoking and drinking at the same time.
That's right.
I just want to kind of touch on, so much of we talk about our recovery plan is something that I choose for myself, and I have to define hopefully I do that in context with a professional. But the main reason I have a recovery plan is because I want to help manage triggers. And you might just talk about what are your main triggers? What are the things that you're most concerned about happening for you in your depression?
My main triggers that I've noticed are experiencing just the intense despair, the feeling of loneliness, the feeling of being isolated. One reason why I have to seek out companionship, seek out being with people as much as possible. That's one of my coping skills. I also have to work on building positive experiences. So volunteering when I can, as well as anything that helps me with building up the serotonin in my brain.
Wow. So that's a great segue to David over here about
And
getting
his
involved with NAMI Wichita.
And David is a great volunteer. I'm participating in a family-to-family class right at this moment on Monday.
So you're actually teaching.
Yes, I am. And it's a class that is limited just to family members that have someone that has a mental illness in their family, with the exception of one night. And that was last Monday night, our session 10. And David and another person came, and they both experienced mental illness. And David basically told his story as he's told it here. And the other person did the same thing. And it was like, the room got quiet, and we were just, wow, the things that they are going through. And we really don't understand as a family what our family member is going through until we've seen this video and their testimonials. And it gives us a greater appreciation. And we have so many family members out here in Wichita that have somebody that has a mental illness in their family. And that's one of the major goals of NAMI Wichita, National Alliance of Mentally Ill in Wichita, is to give these programs for family, for peers, for adolescents, an opportunity to understand and become more aware of what people are going through.
Could you give us 30 seconds on when there are regularly scheduled support groups right now?
Regular scheduled support groups are every third Tuesday of the month at the Presbyterian Church downtown, right across the street from the YMCA in the old Sedgwick County Courthouse. And before we have the support groups, which in the support groups we break off into family groups, and we also break off into peer groups, so everybody can be open and say what they want to. But and before that we have a doctor there that's present to answer questions. So, but this starts at 6 o'clock on every third Tuesday down at the downtown Presbyterian Church.
We're running into another time boundary, and I'm trying to accept that. I just want to give a quick shout out to Bernstein Williams for getting us here. She's been an advocate of both NAMI Wichita and K-Sun Community Radio. We have a gifted person here, David, who's been willing to talk about. He also is a composer, and our theme music is actually going to be composed by him, and it's the Spirit. What is the song?
Spirit Dance.
Spirit Dance. And you made a comment earlier that some people are the lucky ones that don't have mental illness. Well, I think those of us that have mental illness are the lucky ones.
Thank you.
Because we're learning the Spirit Dance, and we're learning that we are stronger because of it. So thank you.